Good day to all tributes from around the world or wherever you're watching this. Welcome back to Tales of the Hunger Games After 100. This is the 103rd Games. As usual, I'd like to thank Andrew Maclaine for all the fabulous renders and art done in this video, as well as Christian Blanco for creating the series on which this is based on. As well, there is now a Discord. I will link it in the description. It is the same Discord that I used for the unofficial Tales of the Hunger Games. And yeah, feel free to join it. You can discuss there, but I just thought that if you wanted to discuss the games or anything, you could do it there. I'd also like to usually thank Khen Siapco and Red Dragon 0814 for creating and helping me edit and proofread the games. Their help is very appreciated. So without further ado, let's head into the video. Zale Herricks, victor of the 102nd Hunger Games, arrived in District 11 after a very rowdy reaping in District 12, which saw much peacekeeper involvement. The once blooming District 11 was now packed with slums after the events of the 100th Hunger Games, which saw this district receive food shortages due to the rebellious acts of Thibaut Girardeau during the games. Once Zale had first arrived in the district, Mayor Cantrell offered her some wine, before taking her on a tour of the orchards. Following this tour, Mayor Cantrell took Zale to her private quarters, where she relaxed until the reaping began. Once the rebellious youths had been wrestled into their respective enclosures, Zale was taken to the stage where she began the reaping. After Mayor Cantrell had given a speech about the importance of the games, Zale walked over to the female reaping pool, where she chose a name. Zale announced this to be 18-year-old Blossom Thieshaw. Immediately, chaos erupted within the female reaping enclosures, as Blossom was approached by peacekeepers. Her sister Rose screamed and foolishly tried to stop her from being taken. However, the approaching peacekeepers hit Rose in the head with their guns, which caused even more rebellious activity to erupt around them. After Blossom had finally been taken to the stage, Zale shook her hand before walking to the male reaping bowl. Zale snatched a name from the top of the bowl, which she announced to be 18-year-old Wither McCain. Immediately, more rebellious activity erupted within the male reaping enclosures, as Wither swore in frustration. Khen commented that District 11 stood a strong chance of producing a victor, as they now had 2 18-year-old tributes. After Wither had been taken to the stage, amidst lots of jeering and insults at the Capitol, Mayor Cantrell wished that the odds be in the population's favor, and quickly escorted the reap tributes into the town hall. Once the tributes were in the town hall, the remainder of the population outside was alleged to have either rioted or to have been punished for the rebellious activity. Blossom was visited by her parents, who wished her luck in the games, whilst crying the entire duration of the visit. Blossom's father told her a few tricks about fruit picking and trap setting, while her mother seemed too shocked by her reaping to speak. After a while, Blossom asked her mother about Rose. Her mother stopped crying upon hearing this, and told her that her sister would be okay. Blossom was then escorted out of the town hall and onto the train. On the other hand, Wither was not visited by anyone, as both his parents had died in a tracker-jacker accident a few years back. Instead, Wither sat in silence throughout the duration of the meeting, while staring blankly at the nearest peacekeeper. Once an hour had passed, Wither was immediately taken to the train with Blossom. On the train, Blossom spoke with Wither about the reapings. Wither told Blossom that he was extremely mad and shouted a variety of different rebellious thoughts. Blossom seemed to understand, and soon Blossom seemed to form a bond with Wither. The tributes spent most of the train ride socializing with each other and eventually formed a good relationship. Halfway through the train ride, Easter Rolex and Delphine Dubois, victors of the 83rd and 92nd Hunger Games, entered the carriage. Easter and Delphine introduced themselves and briefed the tributes on what to expect at the Capitol. After this conversation, Delphine pulled out her screen and showed the 2 tributes pictures of outfits their stylists for this year had designed. Easter excitedly told them that they were fortunate enough to have received Bravo Malayev and Aroma Paddock as their stylists. Upon seeing the confusion on the tributes' faces, Delphine quickly explained that it was this pair that had designed the award-winning outfits for District 6 last year, and thus would likely provide them with unforgettable outfits. After a while of discussing, Wither and Blossom seemed to come to a consensus with their mentors. The pair had chosen outfits which strongly resembled fruit trees, which meant that the pair's hair would be dyed green and adorned with fake fruit. Easter quickly called Bravo and Aroma on his own screen and informed them of this decision. Bravo stated that he liked the choice as well, and informed the tributes that once they were at the capital, he and Aroma would be adding a little more to the outfits than originally planned, which caused all 6 of them to be in smiles as the call ended. Wither and Blossom were then instructed to go to their carriages for some sleep, before the train arrived in Snow Station the next day. The following morning, the train arrived in Snow Station, an hour after the train for District 12 had arrived. Wither and Blossom were taken down the steps of the train, in bright green clothes Aroma had created a week ago. Once at the station, Wither smiled politely and spoke with a few capital citizens, while Blossom shook hands with a few, but after a while, it was clear that the tributes were not ready to meet any capital citizens, and thus Easter led them to the limousine, which promptly took them to the accommodation center. At the accommodation center, Bravo and Aroma politely welcomed the tributes, and told them to take their time and get used to the apartment. Bravo and Aroma then headed to the designing rooms, where they waited. Once Easter had given the tributes a quick tour of the apartment, he led them to the designing room, where Delphine, Bravo, and Aroma were watching the reaping of District 5. Zale had taken to the stage of District 5, where she marveled at the screen behind her, and the youths that seemed to have trouble hearing Mayor Curie, as she gave her speech. After the 100th Games, District 5 was instructed by the capital to not only focus on power production, but to also work on chemistry. This was mainly due to the shortage of chemists in the capital, which saw the district creating most of the chemical beauty products, as well as other substances used within capital mutt labs. Once Mayor Curie had finished her speech, Zale drew a name from the female reaping pool, which she announced to be 15-year-old Luna Jimber. Lauren immediately commented that Luna looked like an introvert, as cameras panned on her face, which showed practically no emotion after being reaped. Luna continued to stare at the screen on the stage in front of her. However, after a few encouraging pokes from her peers, Luna appeared shocked that her name was shown on the screen. However, she nodded gloomily and walked to the stage. At that moment, a light rain began to fall on the crowd. At first a small rain. However, once Luna had shaken hands with Zale, the rain grew bigger, and soon Zale was prompted through her earpiece to select a name before the crowd was completely soaked. Zale proceeded to walk over to the male reaping pool, where she picked out the name of 16-year-old Kelvin Escom. The now wet camera quickly panned on a short, muscular boy with large glasses splashed wet with rain. As Kelvin looked towards the peacekeepers approaching, he nodded his head and shook hands with his peers, before walking towards the stage hastily, most likely to escape the rain sooner. Once Kelvin had shook hands with Luna and Zale, the remainder of the population was dismissed hastily by Mayor Curie. As Zale, Luna, and Kelvin were escorted into the town hall, many citizens outside allegedly had troubles escaping the rain, which resulted in a few injuries that day. In the private meeting quarters, Luna was only visited by her peers, who quickly wished her luck and seemed to be out of words for the remainder of the meeting. Once the meeting was called to a close, Luna's peers seemed somewhat glad to be leaving. As for Kelvin, he was visited by his mother and father, both of which worked in a newly built chemical lab. His mother and father both hastily gave him advice about natural resources that could be used as poisons or weapons. But towards the end of the meeting, Kelvin reminded his parents that he knew most of this information from helping them already. This caused them to cry a bit, and eventually Kelvin was taken to the train. On the train, Luna and Kelvin interacted for a bit, and spoke about their lives in District 5, before their mentor, Lynette Laurier, victor of the 82nd Hunger Games, walked into the carriage. Lynette introduced herself and told the tributes about the upcoming week. Lynette then instructed her tributes to have some lunch from the buffet, and to interact with each other. Luna and Kelvin obliged and grabbed some lunch from the buffet, together, while chatting about their various jobs in the chemical labs of the district. Once the pair sat down together, Lynette asked her tributes if they could hear her all right, which made Lynette breathe out in relief upon hearing that both of them had perfect hearing. Lynette then quizzed them on various chemicals and their properties. Kelvin answered each of Lynette's questions without errors. However, Luna had trouble remembering the uses for the newly discovered element number 245. Lynette seemed disappointed, but told the tributes to work with each other in the games, and eventually left the carriage with a bottle of sparkling apple juice. After Lynette had left, Kelvin reassured Luna and told her that he could help her during training. In a while, Lynette returned to the carriage and told the tributes to prepare themselves for capital crowds. Luna and Kelvin quickly brushed the crumbs off their shirts, and as the train stopped, Lynette led them onto the platform of Snow Station. Both Luna and Kelvin seemed shy around the crowds of Snow Station. However, Lynette advised for them to pose for photos, and thus they posed and smiled for photos with various citizens. During this time, Luna seemed uncomfortable posing with an old lady. However, she noticed Lynette chatting with a group of women, and thus took a selfie with her. Kelvin had done the same with a young man, who explained to Kelvin that he was one of the few capital chemists. Kelvin eventually seemed interested in talking with the man, and afterwards he took a photo with Kelvin and wished him luck in the games. Lynette then took her tributes to the accommodation tower, where they met their stylists, Paramount K and Porpentina Demigloss. Paramount and Porpentina greeted the tributes and asked Lynette if they could hear her properly, to which Lynette replied yes. Porpentina then told the tributes to adjust themselves to the apartment, while they prepared the dressing room. Once Lynette had finished giving her tour of the apartment, Kelvin and Luna sat down in the dressing room and were promptly asked by Paramount whether they worked in the chemical labs or the power plants. Both replied that they worked in the chemical labs, which made Paramount nod and show them a few outfits he had designed. Eventually, Kelvin managed to convince Luna to wear a set of chemist's lab outfits, which were slightly splashed with colored water, making it look like a chemical had spilled. Lynette seemed okay with this idea, and so the stylists got to work. By nighttime, Luna and Kelvin were sent to show Lynette their new outfits, which she seemed very delighted with. As for Wither and Blossom, Bravo and Aroma had designed wigs that looked like trees, and had attached small apples to the trees. These wigs were also equipped with mechanics that allowed them to change form through the parade. Bravo and Aroma showed these mechanics to Easter and Delphine, which seemed to greatly please them both. The mentors then worked with the tributes to instruct them on how to behave during the parade, to which the tributes listened keenly and intently. The next night, the chariot parade was held. Before the parade, Bravo and Aroma spent a lot of time talking with Wither and Blossom. The stylists seemed to be informing the tributes on how to act during the parade, and ignored the jealous stares the other stylists were giving the tributes as outfits. Luna and Kelvin, however, seemed distracted by the careers up front, laughing and socializing with each other, while pointing at tributes they wanted to kill. However, Lynette reassured them and told them to look proud during the parade. She then adjusted her tribute's colors, and the chariot call sounded. The parade started off with the bright lights flashing across the outfits of the tributes from 1, which saw them receive much praise, but also some controversial comments. Midway through the parade, Honor and Takara, both of 1, threw some of these lights into the crowd, which saw some citizens trying to catch them, but others trying to dodge. Chase and Minerva, both of 2, stood on the second chariot, both of whom were well received due to their luster golden armor. The tributes from 3 featured outfits decorated with green 0s and 1s, which was also approved of in the capital. Behind the tributes from 4, Kelvin and Luna, who were dressed in the first ever pair of chemistry-themed outfits, earned many cheers as they held hands and waved to the capital. Further down the parade, Harness of 7 seemed distraught and uneasy, while Gluten of 9 appeared rather green in his outfit. Unsurprisingly, Blossom and Wither wowed Capital viewers. Wolf Anderson and Andrew Maclaine joined Lauren and Ken in the commentators box, where they spoke about the outfits of this year. As expected, the 4 fell silent upon seeing Wither and Blossom. The pair from 11 were dressed in a bright green dress and suit respectively. However, a large wig that resembled the top of a tree was placed on their heads. As Blossom and Wither smiled and waved nervously, several hummingbirds flew out of the wig. Citizens present gasped as these robotic hummingbirds plucked the fruit and flew above the heads of the tributes. As cheers reached a crescendo, the hummingbirds flew over the crowds and gave random capital citizens the fruit, which was not edible, but made of a very valuable gemstone. This commotion seemed to distract viewers from Honor of 1 and Minerva of 2, who had turned their heads and spitefully looked at Wither and Blossom. As the parade progressed, capital citizens gasped again, when the wigs on Wither and Blossom's heads suddenly changed. These wigs suddenly caught fire, which caused many gasps and shouts. However, the fire soon died down, which saw the tree wigs now resemble a lighter shade of green, which many capital citizens pointed out looked like a tree in the summer. As screams grew even louder, the trees ignited once again, and when the fire had died again, the tree wigs now resembled golden autumn trees. Many capital citizens seemed so shocked and delighted that they did not notice the couriers waving for attention from their carriages. Soon, the wigs burned a bright blue flame one last time, which saw Wither's wig withering away to resemble a winter tree, and Blossom's wig blossoming into some beautiful pink flowers. That night, it was unsurprisingly revealed that the chair for District 11 had been voted as best dressed. Back in the apartments, Luna thanked Porpentina for their outfits, while Kelvin listened to Paramount chatting about how he could improve in the future. During this time, Lynette was known to have been on the 11th floor, chatting with other mentors. Blossom was clearly happy to have been voted as best dressed. During this time, Delphine hastily told Blossom to get to sleep. However, Easter told Wither that he was allowed to stay up and watch the mentors gathering. In the lobby outside the apartment, Bruno and Aroma were crowded by many mentors gathering and a few other stylists and cameramen. Bruno and Aroma had asked peacekeepers present to bring out a few bottles of champagne, which they drank as they listened to the various mentors' offers for them to be their district's stylist next year. As Wither watched from the corner, he seemed shocked to see Rubius Dalton, victor of the 86th Games, trying to bet against Zashio Throne, victor of the 101st Hunger Games. Eventually, he was approached by Ava Barrick, victor of the 81st Hunger Games, who congratulated him on his composure during the parade. During this time, Ava introduced herself to Wither and told him about the mentors present and how they had won their games. Wither seemed interested and listened, until Ava walked over to the bar and asked if he wanted a drink before bed. Wither politely declined, and Ava told him that he should get some sleep, before wishing him luck in the upcoming games. The two then shook hands, and soon after, Wither went to sleep. The following morning, the tributes were awoken and served a hearty breakfast of bacon and eggs. They were then taken down to the training center for training. Once there, Ken proudly announced that due to the kindness of President Cardew, new stations had been implemented into the training center. Firstly, the speed station allowed tributes to test their speed on a racetrack, as well as race against other tributes. Also added was a crafting station, which allowed tributes to craft things out of random materials in the station. A stealth station was also added, which provided an area for tributes to practice silence and agility. Most notably, however, was the chemical station. In this station, tributes were given access to a variety of chemicals, which could cause serious injury if used improperly. Khen warned the tributes about the risks of using each station, and soon after, training began. Kelvin and Luna immediately headed to the chemical station, which saw Kelvin become the first tribute to ever use a chemical there. Kelvin immediately began by putting on safety equipment and walking over to the chemical shelf. There, he grabbed some sodium and filled the beaker with water. Kelvin proceeded to perform a simple experiment by placing the sodium in the water and watching as it fizzed. Luna, on the other hand, watched carefully as Kelvin performed this experiment. When Kelvin was done, Luna quietly whispered and pointed out the couriers, who were watching. Kelvin then suggested that they work with some of the other chemicals, to which Luna agreed. Luna immediately walked over to the shelf and grabbed a bottle of uranium. Kelvin seemed fine with this, and soon the pair were experimenting with this element. Although the peacekeepers present had been informed of this newly discovered chemical's dangers, they did not seem to react. Fortunately for them, nothing major happened. As for Wither and Blossom, they had headed to the survival station, where they reviewed their knowledge of plants. After spending some time there, they decided to head to the stealth station. However, before they could approach the stealth station, Honor of One approached and asked Wither if he wanted to race in the speed station. Wither declined. However, a member of the training staff approached and suggested that they would both improve if they did. Thus, Wither was taken to the racetrack, and after a tiresome 100-meter sprint, Honor easily beat Wither. Wither was clearly enraged, and as Honor laughed and high-fived the other couriers, he ran over to the stealth station, where Blossom was attempting to slide behind a tree without being noticed by an artificial bear. In the stealth station, Wither allegedly spoke about his newly cultivated hatred towards the couriers, and vowed that he would practice to kill them in the games. This seemed to shock Blossom. However, the pair spent the remainder of the morning climbing trees and avoiding various mud holograms. The morning passed by relatively uneventfully. Because the couriers were trying out the new speed station, multiple other tributes were given time to practice in the weapon station, which saw an interesting variety of skills being shown. During lunch, Kelvin and Luna were told to practice with the weapons, as there was little chance that chemicals would be found in the arena. Kelvin agreed. However, Luna seemed shy and hid within the chemical station. Kelvin spent the afternoon practicing with spears. However, soon afterwards, Chase of 2 came over and asked if he wanted to fence them. Kelvin declined and told Chase that he would practice for some more time. However, Khen approached, and thus Kelvin was quickly convinced to fence Chase. Within 2 seconds of the fencing match starting, Kelvin's glasses were poked off his face by Chase, and within 2 minutes, Kelvin was bleeding, bruised, and sitting on the side of the fencing area, while Chase laughed with the other couriers. Luna seemed shocked upon seeing her district partner getting beaten this badly. However, she kept calm, and soon she had managed to make a piece of wood turn green. On the other hand, Wither had noticed the couriers losing interest in the speed station, and thus deemed it wise not to go to the weapon stations. He then suggested to Blossom that they head to the strength station, as Delphine had told them to do that during lunch. Wither subsequently lifted a record amount for someone from his district in the station, which was deemed impressive by many training staff. Blossom, on the other hand, mostly sat and watched, while helping Wither adjust the weight of the weights. Eventually, Blossom was instructed to lift as well by the trainer present, which saw her lift relatively poorly. Towards the end of the day, Khen called for attention, which caused all activities in the station to be stopped. Khen then called the tributes in and separated them into 2 different groups. Khen then announced that they would be playing tug-of-war. A rope was swiftly brought in, and a line was drawn on the floor. Once the tributes had each grabbed onto the rope, Khen waved his flag, and soon the tributes were pulling. Within seconds, Honor and Minerva of 2 had managed to help their side pull the flag a long distance away from the line. Blossom, who was in this line, seemed nervous, but she kept her composure as she helped pull. Wither, on the other hand, glared at Khen. However, nobody seemed to notice, and thus he pulled very hard, but did not manage enough to help his side win. Kelvin and Luna, however, were on the same side. Both of them had pulled hard and eventually seemed proud of winning. On Wither's side, however, Jakara of 1 loudly reprimanded Arowana of 4 and Ruma of 12 for not pulling hard enough. As Takara explained how many different ways she would kill them, Honor approached her and pulled her away, telling her not to intimidate the weaklings. Training was then ended by Khen, who congratulated everyone for their efforts. That night, Blossom spoke for a long time with Delphine about the events of the training, while Wither chatted with Easter about his time in the weightlifting station. Kelvin, on the other hand, did not speak with Lynette and went straight to bed, while Luna had a cup of tea with Lynette as Lynette comforted her. Early in the morning of the next day, the tributes were taken to the training center, where their scores were to be assessed. However, as Khen was about to call Honor in, peacekeepers suddenly turned off the lights and a 20-minute lockdown was held. It was alleged that during this time, European rebels had launched a surprise attack on the training center, which saw a few troops enter the building to be shot by peacekeepers. Fortunately, Panem's 5-star military general had deployed peacekeepers in, and the attack was suppressed. Honor's assessment was then completed. During Kelvin's assessment, he seemed nervous, but he ended up scoring a 7, for allegedly displaying decent accuracy with spears and a wide array of reasons chemistry could help him win. Luna, however, only scored a 4, for allegedly making a potion that could explode on contact with water. This was seemingly deemed useless by the game makers, which saw her earn this low score. After Adeline of 10's training session, Wither displayed an alleged strong show of strength, which saw him earn a high 8. However, Blossom only scored a 4. Details of her assessment were never revealed. At the end of the day, all 4 careers combined to score the joint highest score of 10 this year, which Lauren and Khen both later revealed to be very impressive. That night, most tributes spent some quality time with their stylist designing an outfit for their interviews the next night. Kelvin seemed reassured when Paramount explained what to do during the interviews the next day, while Luna whimpered through her meeting with Corpentina. Wither, on the other hand, spoke angrily about the careers and his desire to express himself, which caused both Easter and Bravo to shout "That's the spirit" at the same time. Blossom was clearly nervous during her meeting with Aroma. However, she seemed calmed down when Delphine played a few episodes of Kid Game on TV. The next night, all audience members attending the interviews in Dalton Studios were carefully checked for firearms and other potential weapons before they were permitted in. The interviews began with Lauren's usual speech about her pride in hosting the interviews. The careers' interviews went by easily, like usual. Honor, Jakara, Chase, and Minerva all spoke about the bonds they had formed and the ways they liked to battle. Cloud of 3 followed and spoke about her technology skills, while saying that she had learned a lot from her district partner, Cable, over the past few days. After Logan of 4 had given his uninteresting interview, Luna walked onto the stage in a sparkling yellow dress. During her interview, Lauren managed to coax her out of her shell, and when the interview ended, Luna had told the viewers a little about her life in District 5. This still, however, seemed to bore viewers. On the other hand, Kelvin managed to express his lively attitude to the Capitol, which saw him make a good impression. Towards the end of his interview, Kelvin was asked by Lauren what he was looking forward to for the games, to which he replied, "Making things go boom." Memphis of 6 had an unusual interview, as he had managed to tell viewers about his toy car collection back home, while also speaking about his brothers and sisters. After the tributes from 10's interviews, Blossom walked onto the stage in a sparkling green dress. Lauren immediately complimented her outfit during the chariot parade, to which she thanked Lauren and complimented her dress back. Throughout the interview, Blossom was polite and spoke with Lauren about her favorite activities and events back in her home district, while also telling viewers about her sister Rose. After Blossom had left the stage in polite applause, Wither walked on in a dark screen suit with a flowing cape behind him. Wither sat down and politely shook Lauren's hand before complimenting her outfit. Lauren thanked Wither, and soon the pair were chatting like old friends about the latest recipes in the capital, as well as life within the districts. When Wither walked off the stage, it was clear that he had made a good impression. Once the last tribute had left the stage, Game Maker Blanco walked on the stage in a bright blue tuxedo. Game Maker Blanco was quickly joked with Lauren about their outfits, and soon Lauren was asking the usual questions. After she asked about the new game-making staff, she pressed him for information about the upcoming arena and games. Game Maker Blanco simply replied that it was very unusual, and that he was happy to have accomplished great things working with capital scientists. He also explained that the capital will be rewarded with a new type of mutt this year, which caused curious sounds from the audience and some squeals from the tributes. The interview night then ended, amidst many cheers and applause. The following morning, all tributes were taken to the arena via hovercraft, where they were dressed within the holding rooms. When asked which tribute she wanted to see off, Lynette thought about it for some time before answering Kelvin. Therefore, Luna was visited by Porpentina, who wished her luck in the games. Porpentina did not have much words, and when Luna thanked her, she nodded and the pair embraced. Kelvin, however, was given some quick last-minute tips by Lynette. Lynette reminded Kelvin to find food and water, and soon the pair embraced. However, as Kelvin was about to enter his tube, a pair of peacekeepers marched into the holding room and ordered Kelvin to take off his glasses, as it could give him an unfair advantage. Lynette protested. However, Kelvin removed them, stating that he could still see fine without them. Kelvin proceeded to enter his tube. Meanwhile, Wither was visited by Easter, who wished him luck in the games, and massaged his muscles. Wither then entered his tube, as Easter told him to go get him. When Delphine visited Blossom, Blossom was clearly nervous. However, Delphine comforted her and told her to work with Wither. Delphine then reminded Blossom that she could win, and soon the pair shook hands before Blossom entered her tube. The podiums then slowly rose into the cornucopia clearing. This year's games took place on a large rocky area of land. The cornucopia lay in the center of the arena, where the land curved downwards. Leading away from the cornucopia, there were several large rocks and muddy pits, which contained various mutts that were newly bred by the capital. The arena's terrain was troublesome, but not very hard to navigate. Near the perimeter, several rock formations had formed, which reminded tributes of the perimeter. Back in the cornucopia, the usual goat horn structure lay, glistening in the sunlight. Within the cornucopia, the only weapons present were a variety of sledgehammers, which were very heavy. However, they were not impossible to use. The cornucopia also contained some backpacks. These backpacks and sledgehammers were the only things in the cornucopia this year. Kelvin of 5 was positioned on the easternmost podium. He was clearly squinting at the cornucopia, but was eventually unable to locate any supplies. He therefore looked up ready to run away. Luna of 5 looked along the line of podiums for Kelvin, and desperately tried to make eye contact with him. However, she seemed panicked upon realizing that Kelvin was about to run away. Thus, Luna looked towards the sledgehammers in the cornucopia, and prepared to run. Blossom, however, looked nervous and was clearly ready to run away upon not seeing any food or drink within the cornucopia. Therefore, Blossom turned away from the cornucopia and prepared to run away. When Wither's podium rose, he had a determined look in his eyes, which seemed to become fueled with fire when he noticed Minerva of 2 on his side. Wither looked towards the cornucopia, and seemed determined. The gong then sounded, and Wither ran inwards. Immediately, Kelvin had turned around and sprinted inwards. Kelvin then grabbed a backpack, but narrowly avoided the boy from 10's body getting thrown at him. He then sprinted away with the backpack clutched tightly against his chest. During this time, Luna had run forwards, but upon seeing Honor of 1 slamming his sledgehammer into the skull of the boy from 12, she panicked and ran away towards Kelvin. When the gong had rang out, Blossom had immediately run away. She sprinted until she found a cluster of rocks, where she rested and watched the carnage occurring. Wither, however, had sprinted inwards and snatched a sledgehammer from the back wall of the cornucopia. Wither then glared at Chase, of 2, who had also approached the wall. The boys looked each other intensely in the eyes, before Chase ran towards the girl from 6 and smashed his hammer into her head. Wither then ran forwards and grabbed a backpack, before running away. As Kelvin traveled, he seemed shocked when he noticed Luna approaching his side. When Luna asked if Kelvin had procured anything, Kelvin showed her the backpack, and soon the pair had opened the backpack and poured out its contents. Within the bag, there were several bottles of acid. Kelvin immediately shouted with glee upon noticing this acid. Luna then correctly stated that this acid could be used to dissolve rocks nearby, and within seconds, Kelvin had tested this out and proved this to be correct. Luna then suggested that they save this acid until needed, which Kelvin agreed. Inside the backpack, there was also 1 pair of reusable gloves, as well as a small box that contained a few slices of bread. Kelvin seemed disappointed that this was all that was within the bag. However, he did not seem to care. When 3 cannons sounded, Kelvin suggested that they move. However, Luna pointed out that she could see other tributes in the distance. As Kelvin squinted into the distance, Luna suddenly shrieked and ran through a nearby mud pit. Kelvin seemed confused, but he noticed Harness and Sappa, both of 7, running towards them, and thus realized the oncoming danger. Harness threw the sledgehammer the pair had between them, which smashed against a nearby rock. Sappa shouted at Harness that this was a bad idea, as they no longer had a weapon. Harness seemed to realize this, and soon Kelvin had picked up the sledgehammer and had confronted the pair. Harness begged for mercy. However, when Kelvin slammed the sledgehammer into the skull of Sappa, he screamed and began to run. Kelvin then shrugged and walked over to Luna, before happily stating that they had a weapon now. Luna emerged from the mud pit covered in mud, but safe, and thus Kelvin rested with Luna and chatted for the remainder of the day. Blossom did not move when the 3 cannons sounded, or when Sappa's cannon sounded. However, she spent her time trying to camouflage herself against the rocks, although unsuccessfully. Eventually, she left the cluster of rocks and walked over to a mud pit, where she hid herself for the rest of the day. Wither had left the cornucopia with his backpack slung over his shoulder and his hand held tightly over his sledgehammer. When Wither had finally found a small crater to hide, he placed his sledgehammer down and opened his backpack. Inside, he was delighted to find a bottle of water, as well as an apple. Wither quickly closed his bag and rested until the 3 cannons sounded. Once he heard the cannon sounding, Wither jumped and slung his backpack over his back. Wither then picked up his sledgehammer and ran towards the perimeter. Once he was near a peculiar rock formation near the perimeter, he noticed Cloud and Cable, both of 3, examining these rock formations. Wither listened as Cable discussed how he could climb over these rocks, and soon Cloud began to hoist Cable up onto her shoulders. Sorry for the typo. As Cable proceeded to climb, Wither suddenly jumped out and ran towards Cloud. Cloud screamed and let go of Cable, who was still holding onto a ledge in the rock. As Cloud ran, Cable desperately tried to climb up onto the rock formation. However, Wither sprinted after Cloud instead, and within minutes he had slammed his sledgehammer onto Cloud's head, after apologizing. During this time, Cable had carefully climbed down from the rock formation and had run away. Wither had seen this, but seemed too tired to chase after him, and thus lay down within the rock formation and rested. That night, the portraits of Cloud of 3, the boy from 6, Sappa of 7, the boy from 10, and the boy from 12 were shown, which left 19 tributes remaining. Kelvin and Luna had both seen the portraits. However, after noticing these faces, they simply laid down and slept. Blossom had slept soundly through the night, and was only awoken by the anthem and the portraits. She proceeded to lie back down and fall asleep almost instantly. Unlike most other tributes, Wither constantly jolted awake during the night, and when he saw the portraits, he seemed unable to sleep. Therefore, Wither lay back and looked up at the sky, while muttering incomprehensible things. Blossom was the first tribute to awake the following morning. Once awake, she looked around for tributes, and was lucky to not see any. She then stood up and tried lifting the rocks, but this proved to be too heavy. Blossom looked out into the distance towards the cornucopia, but was unable to see much. Therefore, Blossom slowly traveled inwards towards the cornucopia. Once near the cornucopia, she stayed still and hid herself within a mud pit, while she listened to the careers chatting. Blossom seemed shocked when she heard the careers discussing the various possible locations of the tributes. Eventually, Chase was left to guard the supplies, while the others traveled away in search of tributes. As the night had progressed, Wither had slowly dozed off. Surprisingly, Wither still woke up rather early, and thus he climbed the rock formation and sat on top of it. From there, he looked down into the distance and noticed a few tributes, but decided to not chase them down. Wither spent his time on the top of the formation, munching bread and occasionally drinking water. When Kelvin had awoken, he looked around for Luna, who was still sleeping soundly. Kelvin woke Luna, and together the pair ate some bread. As Kelvin ate, Luna screamed and pointed at a few large creatures in the distance. Kelvin calmed her, and together they slowly backed away. These mutts were some of the newly discovered mutts that had been bred in Capital Labs. These mutts were about 3 meters long, with slimy bodies and a thick shell that protected their backs. Lauren stated that she thought these mutts looked like snails, to which Khen agreed, but also stated that they looked like tasty Nigeri from District 4. As these mutts crept closer, Kelvin soon gasped and told Luna that this was silicon-based life. Luna soon looked closer, and she too gasped upon noting this. Kelvin quickly told Luna that these mutts could only be causing trouble, which saw the two of them quickly running away with their supplies. As they were running, a cannon sounded, which belonged to Memphis of 6 after he was found by the careers, chased down and killed. Within minutes of Kelvin and Luna running, the large mutts had begun to crawl towards them, with surprising speed, and it soon appeared that the burly mutts would outrun the pair. As Luna panted, Kelvin readied the sledgehammer, and when the mutts approached, Kelvin slammed the sledgehammer down the back of the first mutt. The mutt immediately writhed and made incomprehensible noises. However, without hesitation, Kelvin had smacked the second mutt as well. Within seconds, both mutts had seemingly melted and become amorphous shapes. Kelvin then deemed it safe, and therefore the duo hid within a nearby rock formation and rested. Not all tributes were lucky enough to survive these mutts, with Beau of 8 and Adeline of 10 getting bitten and licked by these mutts. Within seconds, their bodies had dissolved due to the acid within the mutt's saliva, with their cannons sounding seconds later. Meanwhile, Wither had noticed these mutts in the distance, and therefore did not come down from his rock formation. However, when a large winged mutt flew towards him, he shouted and slammed his sledgehammer into the mutt. This bird mutt was about 2 feet in length and had various feathers growing from its rock-like body. Wither shouted as he climbed down from the rock formation, while more of these bird mutts flew towards him. Within seconds, Wither had been pecked on the shoulder by one of the 3 bird mutts. Wither swore and angrily slammed his sledgehammer into the bird's head, while he swung it around in a circular motion, which knocked the other 2 bird mutts out of the sky. Wither then swore again and ran back to his rock formation, where he rested. During this time, Blossom had noticed a large beetle crawling across the ground. However, when Blossom attempted to step on it, the beetle did not die, but instead let out an angry, high-pitched sound. Blossom screamed and immediately began to run. However, Chase, who was relaxing in the cornucopia the whole time, heard Blossom, and soon Blossom was being chased down by Chase. Blossom appeared to realize this, and therefore she noticed some snail mutts in the distance and ran towards them. Chase laughed and shouted that Blossom would never outrun him. However, as Blossom neared the mutts, Chase appeared to realize what Blossom was doing. Chase laughed, and as Blossom ran straight through the mutts, he stopped running. The snail mutts immediately caused Blossom to trip, and once she had fallen, they began to lick and bite various parts of her body. Within seconds, Blossom's body began to shrink and dissolve, which caused Chase to grin with satisfaction when her cannon sounded. As noon came around, Kelvin seemed relieved that he and Luna had managed to escape the mutts. However, Luna complained about mud being stuck in her hair. Luna seemed unhappy. However, as she was about to speak with Kelvin, several loud thuds were heard from behind them. The pair screamed and began to run inwards, as more rocks began to fall from the sky. As these rocks fell, Luna noticed multiple tributes running in the distance as well. Therefore, she led Kelvin away from these tributes and towards the cornucopia. Wither had jolted to his senses when a large rock fell and caused an explosion. Wither seemed to realize the dangers, and soon he gathered his supplies and ran inwards. As he narrowly dodged a large rock, Wither seemed to realize that these rocks contained various chemicals, which reacted upon hitting the ground. Wither swore as a large gas cloud erupted behind him, and within minutes he had neared the cornucopia. As night fell, all tributes had survived the meteor showers. However, there were multiple tributes that had suffered from the after effects of the chemical reactions. Letitia, 9, had breathed in some gases and was now turning a pale green, while Logan of 4 was feeling sick. That night, the portraits of Memphis of 6, Bo of 8, Adeline of 10, and Blossom of 11 were showed in the sky, which left 15 tributes remaining. When Wither saw Blossom's portrait, he gasped and muttered "wow," while lying back and sighing. Wither then lay down and rubbed some dirt on his body, which appeared to camouflage himself as he slept. When Luna had seen these portraits, she appeared paranoid. However, she calmed down when she saw Kelvin resting within the rock formation they had found and rested in. The next day, tributes were awoken by 2 cannons, which belonged to Logan and Arowana, both of 4. Viewers had seen the careers waking up early, gather supplies, and travel around the cornucopia area, where they discovered the 4s hiding. Despite Logan and Arowana's pleas for mercy, Takara had slammed her sledgehammer into Logan's head, while Chase did the same for Arowana. When Logan noticed the hovercraft collecting the bodies so close to them, she woke up Kelvin, and together they ran away from where the careers were. Kelvin and Luna then rested. However, as they were about to eat some bread, the large rock they were hiding behind suddenly flinched and rose out of the ground. Kelvin screamed, and as the rock gradually morphed into a large bear-like creature, Luna began to run. Kelvin screamed again as the rock bear rolled itself towards him, and within seconds Kelvin was crushed. Luna screamed upon seeing Kelvin's death. However, as Kelvin's cannon sounded, Luna noticed the bag and the sledgehammer, which Kelvin had dropped. As Kelvin's cannon sounded, Luna dodged the rock and ran for the bag and sledgehammer. The rock suddenly stopped and morphed back into his bear form. The bear form then growled and began to run towards Luna. However, she pulled the bottle of acid out from the bag and splashed it onto the mutt's face. Immediately, the mutt made a deep roaring sound, and gradually collapsed to the ground. Once Luna was sure the mutt was not moving, she put the lid on the bottle, which still contained a small amount of acid, and placed it in her bag. A hovercraft then entered the arena to collect Kelvin's body. However, as the claw grasped Kelvin's torso, the careers suddenly revealed themselves, having heard the commotion. Luna screamed and began to run, which caused a chase to ensue. Surprisingly, Luna ran with rather quick speed, and soon Lauren commented that Luna may actually outrun the careers. As Chase began to gain on Luna, she suddenly turned around and slammed her sledgehammer into his cheek. Chase screamed and collapsed to the ground as the other careers stalked. Luna then picked up the sledgehammer and slammed it into Chase's face, which made him twitch uncontrollably on the ground. Minerva then swore at Luna, before wielding her sledgehammer and running forwards. As Minerva ran, Takara and Honor suddenly charged forwards and slammed their sledgehammers into Minerva's head, which made her collapse on top of Chase and cough out blood. Honor then kicked Chase's head, which made his barely conscious body spit out several teeth. Honor and Takara proceeded to approach Luna, who was now shivering in shock. Takara laughed and asked Luna how she would fight the two of them. However, Luna held on tightly to her sledgehammer as the pair approached. Honor struck first, with him swinging his sledgehammer at Luna. However, Luna dodged and struck Honor in the head with her own sledgehammer. Honor screamed, whilst Takara angrily swore and charged towards Luna. Luna then looked towards Takara. Takara proceeded to tackle Luna. However, Luna slammed her sledgehammer into Takara's side, which made both Takara grunt, before rolling over in pain. Luna then got up and slammed her sledgehammer into Takara's head 3 times, which sounded Takara's cannon moments afterwards. Luna laughed and walked over to Connor, who was twitching on the ground. As Luna looked at Honor, he begged her not to kill him. However, Luna wasted no time in slamming her sledgehammer into Honor's face, which sounded his cannon as a loud cracking sound was heard. Viewers in Snow Square applauded with Khen as Luna stood up and watched the hovercraft collecting all 4 careers' bodies. Lauren commented that Luna had certainly proved herself to be a dark horse. A sponsor gift then flew down for Luna, which contained some water and a note. Luna hastily drank some water and looked at the note, which read, "Good work, L." Luna quietly thanked the sky before retrieving the 4 sledgehammers and hiding behind a rock formation. During this commotion, Wither had hidden himself behind a rock formation and had seen Luna killing the careers. Wither seemed clearly surprised, and for a moment even looked like he would ask Luna to an alliance. However, he chose not to, and instead traveled around the rock formations. As Wither traveled, he noticed Harness of 7, who had camouflaged himself within a mud pit. Viewers gasped in suspense, as Wither approached Harness, who was fast asleep. Multiple spectators were now shouting at Harness to wake up. However, before he realized what was happening, Wither had slammed his sledgehammer into Harness's face. Harness immediately screamed and shouted obscenities at Wither. However, Wither slammed it into Harness's face one more time, which sounded Harness's cannon. Wither then got up and walked over to a nearby rock mound, where he hid for the remainder of the day. That night, the portraits of Honor of Takara, both of 1, Chase and Minerva, both of 2, Logan and Nirawana, both of 4, Kelvin of 5, and Harness of 7 were shown, which left Cable of 3, Luna of 5, Zippy of 8, Luton and Letitia, both of 9, Wither of 11, and Ruma of 12 remaining. Wither did not react to these portraits, but instead nodded, while Luna looked around and sighed while holding onto her sledgehammers. The next day, Wither awoke early and traveled around the cornucopia. However, he jumped at the sound of a cannon, which belonged to Letitia of 9, after she had suffered from chemical disease and died. Wither proceeded to run to where the hovercraft had collected the body, and was surprised to see Gluten of 9 whimpering and apologizing to Letitia. Gluten screamed, and upon seeing Wither began to run. However, Wither caught up to him and slammed his sledgehammer into Gluten's head, which killed him instantly. Wither then gathered his supplies, but seemed suspicious when he noticed 2 sledgehammers lying near a rock formation. Meanwhile, Luna had seen Wither, and as she watched him kill the 2 tributes from 9, she carefully placed 2 sledgehammers in front of the rock formation where she was hiding. Viewers watched suspensively as Luna held her sledgehammer close by her side and waited for any tributes to approach. Within a minute, Ruma of 12 had run to the sledgehammers, and as she began to choose a sledgehammer, Luna jumped out and slammed her sledgehammer into Ruma's back. Ruma screamed and tried to run. However, it soon became apparent that Ruma was paralyzed from the waist down. As Ruma screamed again for mercy, Luna apologized and slammed her sledgehammer into Ruma's head. Meanwhile, Wither was about to pick up another sledgehammer from Luna's trap pile. However, he was distracted by the ringing of a sponsored gift from above. Wither quickly opened the gift and was confused to discover a bottle of water inside. As Wither quickly thanked the sky and told the sky that he already had water, he realized why this was sent upon seeing Ruma running forwards and getting killed by Luna. Wither then gasped and thanked Easter silently, before gathering his supplies, drinking a lot of water, and hiding behind a different rock formation. Luna had gathered her supplies after killing Ruma. However, as dusk fell, several sandstorms formed in the distance. As the sandstorms grew bigger, Luna ran into the cornucopia clearing, and was shocked to see Cable of 3 standing there. Cable screamed and ran away. However, Luna noticed Zippy of 8 running up behind her. Zippy tackled Luna and began to pull on her hair. However, Luna rolled over and kicked Zippy in the behind, which made Zippy scream. Zippy then got up, and as Luna brought up her sledgehammer, Zippy reached forward and grabbed Luna's leg. Luna yelled at Zippy and told her not to touch her legs. However, Zippy unsurprisingly held on and tried to get up. Luna then swore at Zippy. and within 3 seconds, she slammed her sledgehammer into Zippy's skull twice, which sounded Zippy's cannon. Crowds gathered in Snow Square seemed shocked at Luna's sudden display of strength, and as night fell, the sandstorms around the cornucopia grew stronger. At midnight, the portraits of Zippy of 8, Gluten and Letitia, both of 9, and Ruma of 12 were shown, which left only Cable of 3, Luna of 5, and Wither of 11 remaining. Wither had barely reacted when he had heard the cannons, and upon seeing the portraits in the sky, he muttered, "Showdown time." Luna, on the other hand, tried to sleep. However, she sighed upon seeing the portraits, and instead rested. The following morning, the sandstorms forced the 3 remaining tributes into the cornucopia. Cable was fortunate enough to have procured a sledgehammer from the mud pit where Harness had died, after Wither did not notice the weapon. Therefore, Cable was the first inside the cornucopia clearing, where he tried to climb the cornucopia. However, as Cable began to climb the cornucopia, Wither revealed himself and ran forwards. Cable screamed, slipped, and fell off the cornucopia. Cable screamed again when Wither slammed his sledgehammer into Cable's head, thus sounding his cannon. Khen then predicted that Wither would win, while Lauren stated that she was betting on Luna. Wither then looked to the center of the cornucopia clearing, where Luna stood, clutching her sledgehammer. Luna then ran towards Wither, who did the same. As Wither tackled Luna, she screamed and tried to hit Wither. Unfortunately for Luna, the sledgehammer missed Wither as she was on the ground, but instead flew into the air and landed a few feet away. Luna then screamed as Wither dropped his sledgehammer and viciously began to punch Luna in the face. Luna continued to scream until Wither picked up his sledgehammer and smashed it into Luna's face. After Luna's cannon had sounded, it was announced that Andrew Maclaine was the victor of the 103rd Hunger Games. Wither was then airlifted out of the arena amidst controversial reactions in Snow Square. After achieving victory, he was proven to be very popular amidst his fans. However, he proved to be detested by many fans of District 5, because he did not face any major injuries during the games. Wither was not taken to Gall Hospital, but instead to the Accommodation Center, where he was congratulated by Ava Barrack, Easter, Delphine, Bravo, and Aroma. During the days leading up to the victor's interview, he worked with Bravo and Ava to design an outfit, while speaking about the various topics. For his victor's interview, Wither was dressed in a fine green suit adorned with various gems along his back. Wither sat down politely on the palm chair and spoke with Lauren about the games. Towards the end of the interview, Wither was asked what he would do now that he had won. Wither replied that he would live a relatively quiet life in District 11, which caused controversial applause. After Wither had left the stage, Game Maker Blanco walked on stage amidst thunderous applause. During his interview, Game Maker Blanco spoke about how the mutts in the games had been based on silicon, a hard, brittle substance. He explained how these life forms had never existed on the planet until a few months ago, when capital scientists successfully created them. Once Game Maker Blanco had left the stage, Lauren politely ended the interviews amidst applause. Before returning to District 11, Wither attended only 2 parties, during both of which he proved to be a rather quiet guest. Once he had returned to District 11, Wither lived a silent life in the Victor's Village. Wither never married, but was often visited by Delphine, Easter, and some friends.